Hey, good afternoon or good evening, folks, depending what time of day it is for you. I am your host, Dr. Andrew Hill. Welcome to Neurofeedback and Chill. This is our weekly live stream. I see a few people are rolling in. Hey, Radar Ashwood, nice to see you. Don't have a topic prepared tonight. I thought I would just hang out and do some Q&A. Let me see here. A couple of people rolling in. How are you guys doing this evening? So, as usual, I'm going to do a neurofeedback session and explain the process that we do, and answer any questions you have about neurofeedback. Often I go into some deeper topic, but tonight I'm just doing some neurofeedback with you. Going to try a little new technology setup where I'm running the neurofeedback on a different computer actually, and streaming it to the computer from which I am streaming to YouTube. So we'll see if this works. I seem to have different technology setups each time. So, all right, let me get into it. So if you're new to neurofeedback, please ask questions. Otherwise, ask anything else you're curious about. Radar is asking, what protocol am I doing? Can I make this font bigger for myself? Let's see. I cannot. Okay. Probably some C4A1 today. Radar, something pretty basic. Jay Han, could you discuss why you prefer PIR-HEG to NIR-HEG? Sure. Yeah, I can get into that. So let me turn off the title. Is that it? Yeah, there it is. And let me put myself down next to do this side for a second. And so I'm going to go in and plan a session. And I'm on a regular size monitor now, so you can actually see what I'm doing. Often I'm on a huge monitor, so it looks really tiny. All right, so we have a little head plot here, and it's already set up with a C4 minus A1. That's the electrode location, the montage. I'm doing one channel locations. So you'll need a third wire for the ground on most clinical systems. I'm using a pocket Neurobics amplifier, a pretty classic referential montage amplifier requiring two locations to be subtracted basically to create the signal in the head. So C4 minus A1. And I'm going to inhibit 4 to 7 or train down theta. Reward 12 to 15. I'm going to back off on that a little bit. Get a little bit of a headache. Don't want to overtrain. So I'm actually going to do 11 point, let's be fancy and do 625. I think it'll take that. You can do 1/8 of a hertz if you've turned on the frequency settings properly. 14.625. Didn't want to go all the way down to 0.5, so I'm staying at 16. So I'm staying at 0.625. 2234 is fine. Let's just run it for 15 minutes is fine. Check our threshold, 25, 65, 15 every 30 seconds is fine. Save that. Okay. So let's see, other questions jumping in. Hey, VJ, nice to see you. Could you talk about language centers in the brain? Sure, there's multiple of those things. A lot of laterality there with language, left and right, front and back. So you can help me understand what you're most interested in. I'll unpack that a little bit for you. Vita is also saying, and how to improve semantic understanding and nonverbal understanding. So semantic meaning words. That's either language processing or it's just going to be memory, semantic memory. Semantic memory is one of those things that tends to improve lifelong, even with significant memory impairments. Semantic memory is often left intact. And semantic memory is one of the very few types of memory that grows throughout life. And the older you get, the better it gets generally. That's a natural skill in some ways. You know, meditation and learning and just experiencing things will improve semantics. And you can master certain areas if you care about painting out dark corners of semantic information if you wish. Nonverbal understanding. I'll get into that. Sure, that's a language thing for nonverbal. Let's see other questions. Radar's asking, when someone calms down a hot singulate, would you then use HEG or would you next We do not bother since the clients have already had a history of excess front beta. It's a great question, and I can get into that based on what Jehan said as well, or asked about HEG. Radar asking when does training the cingulate help pain? All great questions. This is fleshing out a few things. You guys, thanks so much. I was hoping some people would show up and ask questions. I really appreciate it because I didn't prepare much. But let me put some wires in my head. I'm assuming you can hear me okay. Audio check, everything okay? We're going to use 3 electrodes, basic silver electrodes, a couple of ear clips, and I'll use a slightly tarnished flat one for my head. So put those on my noggin using some electrolyte paste. I have a very scant little bucket of paste without much left in it, so I'll have to scrape the bottom of the barrel a bit literally. VJ's sharing when he said language, meaning being able to be more articulate and complex analytical reasoning, all speech related. Interesting. So we have some questions about HEG and the cingulates and speech. Now, the cingulates are interesting. The short answer, I'll kind of answer the shorter questions first and unpack the larger topic. Sorry, Jehan, your PIR versus NIR question will get addressed eventually, I promise. So the cingulates hold our attention on things, and as you move to the front of the brain, you go much more towards the inside self, and as you move towards the back of the brain, it becomes the outside world. So very, very far forward on the frontal poles, you're sort of in cognitive appraisal land in some ways. Or very lateral, dorsolateral PFC. You're sort of an approach versus avoid, the feeling we have about things. The cingulates will help reconcile the approach versus the avoid, the gas versus the brakes, the left versus the right in many ways. And the cingulates will also select from the competing thoughts and moments of internal awareness we're having. So if you train the cingulate, you can get the brain to be less stuck on pain, literally, the attention to be less stuck on pain. And some forms of pain, not all forms, but some forms of pain seem to have a very strong central component, meaning the brain is echoing or resonating the pain. And if you can shake free that phenomena, then you can sort of reduce the resonance of the brain reacting to the pain of the body's system. We put a little wire on here. I'm kind of sitting here in the dark. Let's see. That's about C4, right? I have a really perfectly shaved head to tell where my C4 is. It's also on my hairline, and I'm not really shaved fully right now, so I can tell. There we go. All right. So I have some pain protocols. Let me plug these in. Using a QWiz amp, going to use red minus black. So red for the head. Black is my left ear, A1. Odd numbers are left side. A is auricular. And then right ear is ground. That goes into the green. And we should have a signal. Let me kick off my eager and then answer more questions and talk about HEG and the cingulates. Good topic. So I do have a whole video on the cingulates, FYI, pretty deep if you want to dig into it. I have at least one actually in the cingulates. I may have an article in the cingulates as well. Let me run my session. Gonna run. Let's do something pretty basic. Let's use variable mazes. And I'll leave the game on the screen for a second too and explain it. All right, initializing. Let me move my self over a little bit. Up here. There we go. Just using some raw signals coming off my head. That's the top squiggle. And then below me we have frequencies. 4 to 7, 11.6 to 14.6, and 22 to 34. It says 0.63 because the display only has 2 digits, so it rounds. But it is reading 0.625 if you go back and look at the filters in the setup. So what's happening is I'm taking the raw signal, or the software eager is taking the raw signal off of my head right now, this subtraction of the right side minus the left ear. And that's the top squiggle. And it's filtering out frequencies or bands below, firing rates of neurons, clusters of neurons, out of that total signal. So we have a 4 to 7 hertz or cycles per second. We call that theta. We have 11 and change. That's a low beta or sensory motor rhythm based on my sensory motor strip being measured. And we have a high frequency beta, 22 to 34 hertz. And if you look there on the right, under the average, the second column from the right, it says, for my theta, it says 23 microvolts, kind of high theta. I must be tired. And end of the day here. And theta is sort of a automatic mode. So when a part of the brain is making lots of theta, it's not doing its job quite as reliably or quite as voluntarily. Instead, it acts more automatically. So we generally want to make less theta in many of the protocols. And so you can see my microvolts are now 20 microvolts for the average. And next to it, there's a THR of 24, a threshold. And that's the lines outside the little squiggle for that band. And so whenever my theta climbs outside of 24 microvolts, it'll stop the game from running. And when my brain is in range or in threshold for theta, so my theta is dropping or staying down, the game will run. And the opposite's true for the next band down with the green line through it. That's the reward band, 11 and change or low beta. When I'm making enough of that, in this case, I'm making 9.5 microvolts, and I set my lines, my thresholds to 7 and change. So I'm outside, I'm exceeding threshold, and so it's a reward band. You want to train that one up. And we have another inhibit band there too. Let me start the software. F5. Actually, let me hit first, with nothing selected and eager, go back and forth, F9, F11, and F9 a little bit. There we go. And then F5. Oh, did not start. Didn't start. Might have lost focus. F5. There we go. All right, so now it's beeping away at me. You can hear that probably. I'm not sure. Let's see if my audio is picking it up. I think so. Let me know if you can hear those beeps. What's happening is when all three bands are trending in range or staying in range, meaning all three bands are on the proper side of the threshold, I'm getting a beep. And this game also gives me this. Oh, there's no game screen, huh? Oh, you know what? I'm on two. It's having trouble with the monitor for some reason. So that's okay. Audio only beeps. So what happens is whenever my brain spends half a second trending in the right direction, the theta goes down and the beta goes up, the game will give me some audio feedback here. And so I can go after this voluntarily a little bit. You can control your theta a tiny bit usually by concentrating. So let me concentrate on that 19 microvolts. And you see now it's going down to 18, 17, 16. So my active concentration is reducing my theta. And my beta, the 11 and change, the ratio is now 2 to 1. Before it was more like 3 to 1. Probably get a bit lower if I want to. It's not that easy to bring up beta without just adding muscle tension and noise and inflating all the signals. But you can bring down theta by concentrating or see that happen. All right, so let me answer some questions here. The idea for the pain phenomena was by relaxing the cingulate, you might get less of an internal central resonance of pain. And you can do that with different pain variants. One of the more effective pain variants, though, VJ, is not the cingulate FZ. I mean, I have an FZ minus C4 pain variant where you down train. But I also have a C4 minus A2 alpha reward that can work very, very well for pain. So I think the right side is more involved. I think it's probably involved with the ventral tegmental area, if I had to guess, and the connections to the cingulate. That's why we get an FZ minus C4 effect. But I think that there's much more of a right hemisphere experience. I think, the right hemisphere having a lot of ability to avoid or to sample that things are negative may be why we get such a strong pain relief on the right side of the brain. Let's see, other questions. Language centers. Let's get to HEG. So I don't have HEG in reach, I don't think, on this desk here. I don't. HEG is a infrared headset, and it's measuring blood flow, essentially. And there's two forms, NIR and PIR. NIR is near infrared, PIR is passive infrared. The near infrared version is very similar to the commercial device, the prosumer device called the MENDI, which is FNIRS, a far near infrared spectroscopy. And those devices, the NIR or the FNIRS, are emitting red light and then receiving red light. And the difference is a proxy for how much oxygenation there may be in the blood, because oxygenated blood absorbs red light differently than deoxygenated blood. So you can measure local perfusion dynamics is the idea. And I've done a lot of work over the years using different HEG, and I just don't love the NIR impacts. I find it to be a little bit weaker, and I've also seen it create headaches here and there and not create a lot of good effects. So I've not leaned into the NIR end of things. I have seen people use it sometimes successfully for the things that I tend to use PIR HEG for. And it can work as a weaker version of that, I think. But the PIR version I find very impactful for helping people move their blood flow and tone their vascular dynamics broadly. So PIR is simply an infrared camera. It's a passive camera, passive infrared. And you strap it to the middle only. So with NIR, you might move it, trying to wake up certain types of tissue is the idea. PIR, you just do in the middle, and you measure a very broad field of focus and get kind of an infrared picture that's changing in temperature with no resolution, or vascular dynamics, controlling literal heat in this case, waves of heat rolling off the brain. I sort of think of it like sitting on the beach watching waves crash on the shore next to you to estimate, how busy is the ocean, how much of a storm or a tide do we have going on. And HEG being blood flow, PIR being blood flow, is semi-voluntary. You can do things like concentrate and bring it up voluntarily or semi-voluntarily. I have several recent live streams, not the past couple, but before that, when I'm doing HEG of the passive variant. So if you're curious, go back and watch a couple of those. But the idea is that blood flow, vascular toning, is both semi-voluntary, so it's kind of done like biofeedback, where you practice, concentrating or feeling it. And it's sort of also involuntary, so it's this odd hybrid in terms of biofeedback versus classic central biofeedback, or biofeedback versus neurofeedback. But I find PIR very impactful for things like concussions, migraines. I find it can goose developmental features sometimes in autism. Can really help with strong concentration. It can brighten the brain in aging. So I really do like the sort of broad neurovascular, if you will, training using HEG. But it's not a good tool for everyone. Someone asked, maybe it was Radar, if it wouldn't make a lot of sense because the cingulate used to be hot, and that is valid. Generally, you don't want to train front midline activation, even though the PIR signal is relatively diffuse in its field of focus. You're getting the whole, brain pretty much. It is going to activate the front midline if you have a tendency for that. And if you have that tendency, you probably don't need to develop more frontal focused perfusion toning, if you will, unless maybe you've had other metabolic problems like, post-COVID or a concussion. You may need to, you may want to, but you're probably going to be prone to overactivating those resources. So it makes a lot of sense to be very careful and move slowly, or not to do it potentially. You might want to do a brain map or two and figure out if, those features still obtain before doing it. So I think that answers the questions about HEG a little bit. I'm feeling my neurofeedback kick in. You can see that my SMR, my low beta, has risen by about 10%. I'm feeling more calm, more focused. A little bit of warmth. My theta is staying down, so the ratio is staying below 2 to 1 or about 2 to 1. I'm not bringing up any beta either, any high frequency beta, so it's not muscle tension causing the increase globally. There's a run of theta though. I'm distracted, thinking more abstractly. All right, what questions have I not answered? Language centers. So VJ, quick tour of language centers, front left, and these are general. People are different, one to the next. So there can be some really weird patterns of language in terms of organization, but generally, front left Broca's is productive. It's where you bring out language and you assemble it into speech. Back left, you have Wernicke's area, receptive language. Between them, you have the arcuate fasciculus, the bow-shaped ribbon. And you can have aphasias or speech production issues, understanding issues, or combination issues like stuttering or dyslexia with timing between those areas. Now, theoretically, for most people, let's say, the right analog to Wernicke's will do things with numbers and symbols that are not verbal. And you'll also have around those areas in the right other non-verbal communication things like tone of voice, verbal prosody or lilt that carries emotion like sarcasm and humor. Those sorts of things will show up on the right-hand side generally, adjacent to language, to math areas. So the Wernicke's analog is more math, but then a little more anterior, you have some other nonverbal things. And there's something in the front right, although it's not a very well understood feature set. And there's also something behind, if you will, Wernicke's, that's also not a well understood feature set. Just cranking through some rewards here with the beeps. So I think that's the general landscape of language. But again, it changes one to the next. You can have atypical laterality in language really easily. Something like 8% of people probably have a different type of brain laterality with regards to language. It's not lefties versus righties in language. Most lefties have that same left versus right language that everyone else does. More of them, but twice as many lefties have atypical language as righties. But it's still a pretty large number, like a few percentage points of both groups. And so in that case, you might get very rarely flipped brains. Somewhat more commonly, you'll get duplicated or imperfect, the sort of creation of language and innate ability to pattern for grammar and innate ability to pattern for number system rules, which is like grammar. Those phenomena can be lateralized probably are lateralized during development, and you can get atypical laterality where you might end up with duplicate language areas or imperfect timing between areas, and you can get all kinds of dyslexias and dyscalculas and all kinds of stuttering and interesting verbal phenomena and nonverbal phenomena with timing issues and differences between hemispheres and with developmental trajectories that are different one person to the next. A lot of the language stuff, especially with regards to receptive language, but back half of the brain is the outside world. So receptive for tone and for meaning. That's going to be locked down a little bit, about age 8 or 9 for a girl and 9 or 10 for a boy. Before that, you can hear speech sounds that you've never heard before, phonemes. After that, you've pruned them out, and your brain won't recognize a speech sound you haven't heard before, basically, or really novel ones, and it will assume most of those are some variant of something you have heard. And this is the basis of accents, or you can understand an accent, basically. It's also why you can't lose an accent very well after age 10 or 12 or something, because the brain has gotten less plastic in those receptive and phonological phoneme processing areas back here. So that's a language tour. Other questions, let's see. Brain Excel San Diego. Hey, Ilya. Are there known supplements that are associated with dorsolateral PFC activity in the same way that NAC impacts the anterior cingulate? Great question. There probably are, but I think it's unlikely to be universal across people. If people have nutritional, bottlenecks, genetic or metabolic, methylation, for instance, you could see where the right front might get more active and could respond to the proper B vitamins, or maybe serotonergic supplements can shift the asymmetry. In fact, that's very likely. They're a little risky to take, right? So talk to your doctor, but serotonergic supplements like St. John's Wort or 5-HT P. 5-HTP is cleaved into 5-HT, which is also called serotonin. But 5-HTP, the supplement, will become a precursor to serotonin, basically, and then to melatonin downstream, because serotonin is cleaved off into melatonin. So you have this sort of manufacturing chain, but I'm not sure that It's always a good idea. However, you can work on both the anterior cingulate and frontal asymmetry, or mood, quote unquote, with serotonergics. So St. John's wort and 5-HTP could work on mood for some people as potential lower key versions of SSRIs, or the same theory of modulating the serotonergic system. Joe Barr is asking, in eager, is the microvolt a function of the amp used? I.e., would voltage vary in amplitude with a different amp? It should not, no. If the amp's good, you should get a similar voltage. You'll get relatively different voltage slightly based on how you set it up, like the thickness of the paste and a few other features, but within reason. If your signal's clean and you're not bleeding in other things beyond the EEG, the rough power at a location from the same montage should look about the same. Yeah. I mean, you've seen here, me sitting here, the power of my theta has been as high as like 24, 25 and as low as 17 or 16. So this is a pretty wide range. If I sit very still and stop talking, the average and the total signal will go down as well, because I'm adding some noise by moving. You can see there I clipped it out in red just there. Radar's asking, do I find neurofeedback effective in helping neuropathy? I do. Depends on why it's there. If it's peripheral neuropathy, diabetic neuropathy, then I would probably think that doing work on the distal tissues with, again, their metabolism, things like benfotiamine, the B vitamin that has preference for distal tissues, thiamine, may help sugar metabolism, help wake up those tissues. But with central neuropathy or general neuropathy, yes, I've actually seen neurofeedback do a fair amount. Jehan, follow-up question just asked, if the raw signal is of good quality, does it matter if the voltage is different on different amps? Yeah, it shouldn't be really. And if it looks good, it's a decent signal is the short answer. If I had bad impedance, this would be a fuzzy fat signal. If there was 60 hertz noise from a source nearby, you'd see it. So with a bipolar or a referential amp, a single channel, or even two channels, you're getting a common mode rejection. You're getting a really cleaned up signal because just using two wires, one from the other. So generally it's a pretty good, if you see a clean trace in software that isn't doing filtering. Eager is really good at not over filtering the data. There are some software packages where you can think you have clean data on the screen. There's a fat line going along, and it's not. It's being heavily filtered and smoothed. And software that does heavy filtering and smoothing, a lot of forehead consumer bands, for instance, will do this. You end up with so much filtering to filter out the muscle that you break the relationships of the signal, the timing relationships of the signal to the brain. And so the feedback coming back in has very little timing contingency on the brain signals coming out. This is why using things like the Muse headset might be better for grading your meditation retrospectively instead of necessarily doing real-time neurofeedback and trying to get through that EMG issue. At least that's my theory about the technology. I don't trust it as much for that reason. It also is hard to get a good signal, and you don't generally want to train in the forehead. Radar is saying, so you said the right hemisphere is more responsible for pain. I think so. I'm not sure, but I think so. Does that mean having a lot of beta on the right side is amplifying pain? Yeah, you will see in chronic pain signatures, you'll see right front. And again, I think it's the dorsolateral, the ventral tegmental area, which is also involved with rewards, also involved with addiction. But I think it's the right ventral tegmental area. And its connection to the cingulates, to the right precentral gyrus, maybe the insula, which is about body awareness. That might be involved there too, because that right side, there's some idea we're tapping into the insula, even though it's a bit deeper cortical tissue. So I've also used there's a protocol. Those of you who work with me, I see a few on this chat. I have a protocol called the Snackers protocol, which is FP1 minus M2 with a 12 to 14 hertz reward, 2 hertz wide reward. I've actually used that one as a pain protocol once or twice and as an emotional relaxation, kind of like an FP2 protocol. So for some people, you can get access to things that are deeper by doing these really unusual montages. Radar, I will say about pain though, with a chronic pain phenomenon, you'll often see somebody with the vertex really lit up in beta and fast beta. And it's not necessarily muscle tension. You will see muscle tension creeping in depending on the montage. But you'll also see an awful lot of difficulty when someone's experiencing pain just as resident beta. They can't let go of the beta in their brain. They're kind of bracing and buzzy, and it's angry all the time. Just like you'll see chronic high levels of generalized anxiety is the same signature. And you can't really tell high anxiety away from high pain. And they can be the same person, of course. So, all right, questions. Let's see. Radar Ashwood's asking about neuropathy question. Yeah, I went back to that. Yes, NFB. I don't think neurofeedback helps with diabetic neuropathy. I would start with benfodiamine for that. But if you're having systemic pain, then maybe, you know. I've seen neurofeedback affect a lot of pain I didn't think it was going to affect. So I would say, you know, if you have access to the equipment, it can't hurt to try some pain-focused work. But I'm not sure it would be my first strategy. I'd probably think about benfodiamine. I'd probably think about exogenous ketones. I'd probably think about sauna. Probably think about hyperbaric medicine, you know, doing some dives in a chamber. Those might all have more utility, maybe red light therapy for blood, you know, up in like between the 670 and the 800 nanometer range. Do tissue-based red light therapy maybe, that kind of stuff. That's probably what I would suggest doing. And maybe neurofeedback. You know, once you've had pain for a long time, the brain will start to echo it. So if it's a chronic phenomena, the neurofeedback will maybe be a very quick relief or a shift, anyways. It probably won't completely eliminate it, but it will let the brain shift the pain usually, often quite a bit, and often very quickly. So the time to do a pain protocol in neurofeedback is when you're experiencing pain that's uncomfortable, because you will generally notice the shifts more when things are acute. Jehan, do I worry if someone has had a surge of sadness or anger during a session? Do I alter the session? When does it reach the level of abreaction? Not from a single session. You can get fatigued or waves of emotion here and there. I like people to really look at the hour or two after a session as more important than the in the session. Unless you feel uncomfortable, stop the session, you know. But you know, stuff comes up here and there. You're stretching your brain gently, and so mild fatigue or even feeling a little on edge, a little motion wash over you here and there, a little sleepiness, like you're fighting to keep your eyes open here and there. Those things do happen. It's the same way that going to the gym. It's not an abreaction to have your arms suddenly shake from holding the curl bar up while you're doing it, you know. But you don't want anything to be uncomfortable later on. So really the way you judge an abreaction is what happens in the 2 hours post-session. If somebody's coming right back down to ground, or they refresh their deep fatigue or whatever it is, it wears off, then it's probably not an abreaction. And you'll know because sleep will be good or better, and later on that day or the next day they'll feel good or better. Abreactions linger. The negative effects of training, the sort of fatigue effects, will linger or magnify. So like one example is if you're doing an anxiety protocol, you may get really, you know, good anxiety reduction and then a surge of anxiety in response. But that particular protocol response, one of two things would happen afterwards. Either you would, it would wear off, and you know, it wouldn't be that dramatic, and it would wear off in an hour or two. And if it was an alpha rebound, you would probably sleep poorly that night, and you would let us know, and we would adjust it, and it would wear off, you know, unless you repeated that protocol. And the other way that could happen is if it was sort of the right protocol for you, create a very strong response, and then you would sleep really well and feel more even keeled the next day. So you can sort of judge. In-session effects are interesting, but not as important as the first 2 hours after a session. And then the 24 hours is really the emergent effect that we're really looking for. So you judge arousal phenomena based on how you feel right afterwards and how sleep flexes generally, and then you can grade the other stuff. But especially the way that I do neurofeedback, easing in, testing protocols, I try not to get to a place where we've created those stronger effects. I don't jump into that generally. I index people's responses using safer protocols on the central strips. And then only once we get deeper in do we, move there generally. Let's see. Jehan, a Canadian psychologist, and his daughter marketed subtle tones that he said could alter EEG. Paul Swingle. I think it's Paul and Mari Swingle. Do you have any thoughts about that? I'm not a big fan of the whole tones altering entrainment thing. I mean, I know a lot of people believe the Swingle sound, the Swingle tones do something. I don't know. I mean, I respect Mari and her work, and the Swingle Center might be the largest neurofeedback center, certainly in Canada. It was a big one for a long time. It may still be. But they're doing clinical neurofeedback, more clinician-focused work, individualized work, and they work one person, one clinician, one person working with you. And I sort of view what they're doing as part of the clinical package, perhaps, when they're also, sitting and riding thresholds or doing things with individuals, perhaps. It's a different relationship with the neurofeedback process. I don't know that I believe in binaural beats or entrainment that much in humans. I think the evidence is fairly weak. I think there is some evidence coming out in the past few years, but for the past 20 or 30 years, as long as the Swingle sound packs have been around, I don't think there's really been much evidence. And most of the audio entrainment evidence or research that's been done with humans comes back with essentially non-findings, and that there's no frequency following response and that kind of thing. So I don't know. I think audio entrainment or audio stimuli are mostly useful for meditation type practices. I don't think that the quality of the sounds generally create the quality of the brain experience. I think the ability to, the permission to be given something to focus on and to notice is really more the important part. Another flavor of meditation or mindfulness, perhaps. Is there a kind of pain that comes from slow waves instead of beta? Radar is asking. Yes, you can have disinhibited slow wave phenomena. You can also have low theta, like holes in your theta that can produce pain for some people. Generally, you'll see pain in the teens, though. Like the pain phenomenon itself will usually show excesses that are and respond to training excesses in the 15 to 23 range, often 18 to 23. I do a 12 to 18 inhibit when I'm doing the ventral tegmental stuff like FC minus C4. And I do a broader inhibit, like a 15 to 30, which is kind of old school Othmer style when I'm doing right-sided C4A2. So let's see. Any brand recommendations for light therapy? Depends where, for Jehan, depends where you want light. On the brain, I have a good company called Neuronic. Can get you a discount on one of their devices for $100 off. But otherwise, the light panels, I would just actually probably go to Reddit and find a good brand. They're changing so often, and in the 650 to 800 and whatever range, you can find a lot of options. And I would just really think about the form factor. You're gonna hang out on a wall. Is it a desktop unit? Is it for your face because you want nice skin? That kind of stuff. Think of the form factor and look for some reviews on Reddit or Amazon or something. Probably there's plenty of ones below 800 nanometers, which are for soft tissue. There's not a lot out there that have the good frequencies up in the 1070s and above for the brain. So Radar's asking, does the Snackers protocol risk turning up a hot cingulate? It does not. No, it's not touching the cingulate. FP1 minus M2, mastoid 2. 12. It's an SMR frequency reward, 12 to 14, but you also inhibit theta. You also might inhibit high beta, like 20 or 22 to 34 or something. So look at your EEG. Ask your provider how to tune that for yourself. Where do I see? Hey, Weekwis, where would I see issues when someone struggles with switching gears? Probably the front midline, the anterior cingulate. If you're too stuck with switching gears, you get caught in a loop. That's usually anterior cingulate. Sometimes it can be posterior cingulate, and sometimes you can have aspects of the back right. There can be social components to it, or the right front. If there's a lot of rejection sensitivity, emotional rumination around that, the right front might be involved. If there's a lot of sensory environmental obsessiveness, small sounds driving you nuts, then the behind the right ear might be involved. But generally, the front midline's involved when switching is a problem. So go watch my video on the singulates. They get really, really deep into some of the ideas there. Jehan, NewMind has an integrated photic stimulator. Would something like that help for SMR kinds of training? It would not, in my experience. Photic stimulation is useful for doing QEEGs under some circumstances when you're trying to elicit seizures to do seizure focus localization. I don't think photic stimulation is generally a good idea. The brain doesn't love it, as far as I can tell. Usually, it's just it's an annoying stimulus for the brain more than anything else. Also, if you want to see seizure activity in the brain, the best way to do that is not to use photic stim. It's to have sleep depth. It's to do a midnight map or a map, at 6 a.m. after being up all night. Then you'll see your seizure-like activity in the EEG much more likely. Radar, Dr. Hill, I think Dr. Swingle would be more than happy to show you the data. That's okay. I mean, I've looked very deeply into audio, and I think that, I'll look for published data, but case data one by one, it's not the only. The thing is, it's not the only thing they're doing with those people, right? It's a whole clinical process, I believe. So, I mean, if there's actually published papers, I'll read them. But as far as I know, there's not on the sounds themselves. VJ's saying the neuronic device is amazing. Yeah, I like it too. For some people, it can really goose the process or be an additive, fuel. So I sort of view the neuronic and other PBM or photobiomodulation devices kind of like a fuel where you want to have a metabolic input sometimes in the neurofeedback process, especially if you're struggling with aging or fog. And that means that HEG or red light therapy could both be that metabolic boost, or hyperbaric or saunas. They all kind of fit into that same bucket. So you don't need to do all of these things. But if you need some metabolic boosting, then red light therapy, photobiomodulation through the skull into the brain seems to feed the mitochondria pretty directly. I would sort of say hyperbaric medicine is probably in a similar boat with like doing direct fueling and mild stressing of a system at the same time, which I think red light therapy also does. It's a mild stressor for some folks. Do not train or treat through fatigue with red light therapy. If you feel fatigued doing it, or congested or stuffy, or increases in headaches, take the red light therapy helmet off. It's rare, but that's not a thing to train through. Jehan, does it matter where the ground lead is placed for neurofeedback? Some people place it at FZ, others on the ear or mastoid. It does not matter in the slightest. Old classic places to put it for assessments: the tip of the nose, or 2 on the forehead. If you have an old MITSAR, it'll have 2 grounds, and this was the standard place to put them both. But in sleep studies, the nose was often used. Can you imagine sleeping with a wire taped to your nose? No, the ground can be anywhere. There was a study, Dr. Jay Gaddis was rightfully so griping about this particular recent study in the neurofeedback, I think, advocacy group perhaps he was, or the QEG professionals group on Facebook. He was asking if anyone had this paper, knew more about this paper that was doing, I think it was an OZ, they said an OZ active electrode, and they said an arm ground, a forearm ground. They didn't mention the reference. Now, active and reference is often a bit of a misnomer with a bipolar or referential pair anyways. But they didn't mention the reference of the second electrode in the subtraction. But that was showing that you can do body-based grounds, no problem. And that's an old school thing to do, often when doing, again, assessments, sleeps and things. Okay. Hi there. Sorry, my eyes are going and the screen is tiny. The HD recorder. Hello, HD. Which sites can improve processing speed? Left front, and also I would say PZ, because PZ is one of the big cortical alpha generators. So if you can improve the tone of PZ, the parietal without, or the posterior cingulate without jacking it up too high, meaning if you make excess theta back there, or your alpha's kind of weak in the regular frequencies, training it up will improve processing speed. Getting rid of sleep issues, C3, CZ will improve processing speed. And then goosing the approach system left front can improve that sort of ability to step on the gas more voluntarily. I don't know if it improves the speed, but it seems to create more use of that speed. Yeah. So these are all phenomena. You can also do, there's a lot of non-site specific things that might bring up speed. HEG could do it. Meditation can probably do it. Doing bilateral intrahemispheric contingent training like C3A1, C4A2 duals or contingencies, that might do it. Some of this will be really driven by what the individual person's brain looks like, what the tracks are doing, which we can sort of estimate, and if there's particular regions acting as bottlenecks. You always want to look at the bottlenecks and the foundational stuff for yourself first, and those likely are the things that'll move the most. Jehan, I feel like the early research with alpha asymmetry wasn't really repeated with larger numbers. Thoughts on alpha asymmetry? Yeah, I mean, the work on approach versus avoid with Richie Davidson, it was overgeneralized and people ran with it in a couple of psychology landscapes, including neurofeedback. And Dr. Davidson never really went quite as hard with his subsequent papers. And he ended up backing off the idea that it's the really strong frontal asymmetry that's the driver of this. And he sort of said it's more of a general left versus right dominance that creates this approach or this positivity. And I will say I've seen that. When you're looking at phenotypes in the EEG, you can think of phenotypes as fitting a few different categories. If they're stable for one person, they're a feature in your data. But then there's phenotypes or features that are well conserved across people. They usually mean what you think it means, or what they often mean. And then there's features that might mean those things. And the frontal lobe left to right organization is a weak marker. ADHD markers for high amounts of theta and alpha in the central strip, strong, 80, 90% of the time, that's what they mean. But the frontal asymmetry stuff as a phenotype, as a biomarker for mood, it's kind of weak. Now, if you unpack what you're seeing, you usually can find some features of those tissues that still make sense. Maybe it's motivation, not depression. Maybe it's a sense of overwhelm, not a sense of anger or whatever. But, you don't necessarily see frontal asymmetry predictive of mood. But if you have low mood, you probably have some features of frontal asymmetry that are relevant. And you'll also see when mood is a factor and you have frontal asymmetry stuff going on, you typically see the alpha speeds, the peak alpha frequencies dipping quite a bit, specifically in the left hemisphere, which again, I think where more of that approach system is. So it makes some sense that we would see more mood on that left side, or failures of the approach, failures of the joy showing up on the right, on the left side. The HD recorder, where can alpha be trained up at, and alpha theta? I mean, generally you can train alpha up wherever alpha is made, so alpha likes to be made in the cingulates. Alpha likes to be made in the sensory tissues when the eyes are closed, stuff like that. So alpha theta would generally be done on the back stripe, the Z strip. So, PZ, POZ, OZ, right? PZ, which is over the cingulate theoretically, POZ just below it, and then all the way down to OZ, which is between the primary visual cortices, right in the middle. All three of those are very classic to do alpha theta on. There's a lot of people that do alpha theta historically, although it's less done these days on O1 or O2, although that can be really intense for some people. O2 creates a lot of very intense emotions, not great ones for some people. There is some alpha asymmetry in the tips of the lobes back there, but it's not well understood. So it doesn't respond quite as well to going asymmetric. You can do bilateral sums and duals where you're training both sides at once. That works pretty well. So, and the homotopic sites generally, so PO3, PO4, P3, P4, O1, O2, that works fairly well for doing alpha thetas for most people. Look back at the literature, you'll find that most of it used PZ, PZ minus A1. A lot of the early literature would do SMR after it, and then it was dropped because they discovered that they didn't really need to. But most alpha theta, the vast majority of the literature is at PZ minus A1. That's like 3/4 of probably what's been done clinically over the years as well. Although there are a lot of variants, but they're rewarding things in the back of the brain generally. VJ, so I'd be fine to train up alpha at the temporal lobes with eyes closed. Yes, but only where it's being made and when which alpha. So in temporal lobes, you may find, look at your QEEG, but you may find that 10 to 13 or 11 to 14 is really what you want to go after, and not like 7 to 10. Look at relative power in the temporal lobes, especially for getting a sense of which frequencies are jumping out. It's an easy way to do that. But you'd have to have a reason to train. Like, you don't want to just train random places because you want to train random places. Have a reason for it. Have a theory about, that you want to test. This part of the brain's doing this for me, and these frequencies might be a little weak because my brain shows it. Therefore, otherwise you have to have a rationale. Otherwise, you can't grade what you've done. So make sure that you have a good reason for it. Since I said sensory strips. Yeah, the sensory is really, is just the C strip, honestly, VJ. If you would just ear to ear, that's the line. Just behind that is sensory tissue, the sensory strip. Just in front of that is the motor strip. And then you have the sort of Z strip, or the cingulate, front to back. But yeah, got to be careful with training up randomly. Temporal lobes are very sensitive to training, and you shouldn't necessarily just do it because. So Radar's sharing, training up low alpha dramatically increases GABA. Yeah, alpha theta probably increases GABA quite a bit. All the alcohol work I've done in alcohol treatment centers, all the initial work, the Peniston protocol, Peniston-Kowalski, that's alpha theta. Alpha trains up strongly, yeah. We also get immune function. Dr. Gary Schumer's work showed that if you reward PZ, eyes closed PZ at alpha, reward will bring up T cells, CD4 plus cells, pretty reliably, pretty aggressively as well. Really big surges in people with immunocompromised features in this study. So that's worth checking out. Dr. Gary Schumer. So guys, I really appreciate all of your time today. Thanks for all the awesome questions. I'll maybe get another training session going next week, but I'll change the thumbnail on this video once we figure out what it is we talked about tonight, and I'll change the description and put some notes in as well. Next week, maybe I'll come back with a topic. I was digging into some of the ways that exercise seems to impact the brain that I thought were really interesting. I just didn't get my head around the topic quite enough to share it and teach it to you guys tonight. And I have a few other topics I'm working on, and I'll share those as well. But let me know if there's more things you want me to talk about. If there's questions you have, please feel free to leave a question in the video later on. If you're not watching this live, I do come back and answer them. And do me a favor, like the video, subscribe to the channel. Only about 2/3 of folks that hang out are subscribed, so please subscribe. I'm so far away from 10,000, it's not funny, but you could be one of those 10,000, so jump on it. And I do appreciate it. If you want to make me really happy, share the video with someone else and turn them on to the cool thing that is neurofeedback. All right, guys, you have a lovely evening. Let's see, one more question. What about theta? Weakwas is asking, where can that be trained at? Same place as Weakwas. Alpha theta is done generally all the way in the back at the P sites and the O sites. And you would not generally want to train up theta places where it's not being made. It can be very unpredictable. I would say that people like Sieber and Fisher do train, historically have trained, theta up on right front areas, but that's kind of raw. And Sieber herself has moved, and people like Ruth Lanius have moved, I believe, to the back of the head primarily, because it's much more of the production mode of those tissues with the eyes closed. And taking frontal areas offline briefly or putting them to automatic modes briefly can be less predictable. So I think training theta up generally the same places you would want to do alpha theta, which is POZ, OZ, etc. Those kind of places are much safer than trying to do those in more narrow frontal areas. So, all right, guys. Well, I enjoyed hanging out with you tonight. Thanks so much for keeping me company, and I will see you in a week or so. You take care of those brains, and have a great week.